Hi, everybody. Welcome to Conversations with Calvin, We the Species. It's actually December 1st today, and you all will be seeing this about a week before New Year's because this panel discussion is called No More New Year's in conjunction with this, which would be released tomorrow on December 2nd by Gary Hill in the anthology that includes works from Gary Hill, Heath Alberts, Dustin Ernest, who's here, and some T.S. Eliot, et cetera, et cetera. But no.
And let's also don't forget to mention Kevin Wood and Adam Crump. Neither of
and
whom
you're going to do that. You know
Okay.
what, Gary? I'm going to introduce you.
Okay.
You're gonna take that, and you will introduce this whole piece of work,
Okay.
which I've read a chunk of it today, and I'm hugely emoted from what I've read from you guys, and we're going to discuss that. But No More New Year's is in conjunction with New Year's Eve, which has nothing to do with New Year's Eve per se, or New Year's Day, but No More New Year's. So you all figure it out. But this is a special group that Gary has put together, and I feel very privileged to be kind of a moderator on this. And the other great thing about having met Gary and I've been also very fortunate enough to get and read his spooky stories that we did in conjunction with Halloween and Horrifying Holidays, which actually is going up on YouTube tonight when we're done.
Oh, nice.
Yes, in conjunction with Christmas.
I almost wore that. I've got a shirt of that cover. I almost wore it tonight.
Oh, and I'm just so glad. And you know what? We just passed Thanksgiving, and I'm filled with gratitude that I met you, Gary, because the great synchronicity and commonality, and you've introduced me to new worlds, and I appreciate that, and new people, and I appreciate that too. So this will be a fun segment, and we're going to go off on a whole bunch of different tangents because we were already discussing that before we went on air. So without further ado, I've said my Johnny Carson monologue. I think you all remember him. I'm doing a date check here. Make sure you're all Gary, why don't you introduce yourself, talk a little bit No More New Year's, and then Heath and Dustin can do a little bio, and then we'll jump in.
Okay.
Work.
So I'm Gary Hill, and I think if you've been following Calvin's stuff, I probably don't need to really do a bio because I've been on several of these. But I run, in addition to other things, I run Tales of Wonder and Dread Publishing, which is where No More New Year's is published. And the idea was a collection of apocalyptic tales. And there are some poems and there's some public domain poems. And like I said, when we get to talking about, if you want to talk about stories a bit down the road, I should probably, why don't I just mention Kevin and Adam's stories right now, since they couldn't be with us tonight. But Kevin Wood has a story in here called The Porch, which is a story about a guy who's so depressed about the breakup of his girlfriend that the whole world is ending around him. And he's just sitting on his porch having a cigarette and watching it. Like it's no big deal. And I told Kevin I was on his radio show because he does the morning show locally here. And I told him when I read that story, to me, it had almost a Nick Frost, Simon Pegg kind of vibe. I mean, I could see it sort of a Shaun of the Dead sort of sense of humor to it, which I thought was really cool. And so that's a really neat story. And then the other one who couldn't be here of the newer stories is Nuclear Winter, and it's by a gentleman named Adam Crump who lives in New Zealand. And that's a bit longer tale and a little more complicated, but the basic premise of it is that someone wakes up in a military installation, and they've been asleep apparently for a long time. They're told that they were traveled through time, and they're in the future, and that there's been a war and everybody's dead just about. And that's sort of how that story starts, but it goes quite gets into quite a bit of other stuff as it goes along. I wish Adam was here to talk about it, but unfortunately he couldn't make it to a large degree because of the time difference. But so I think that's pretty much, like I say, we've got some public domain stuff and everything, and everything, the other stories in here other than mine, well, I guess I could talk about my two stories a little bit too. Both of my stories have been previously published. They're called The Debut Tour and The Stars. Now, both of my stories, although the second one is a little harder to tell until later, but they're both based on H.P. Lovecraft's mythos. And in fact, the first one, The Debut Tour, I wrote as sort of an homage to Lovecraft. I tried to write it as best I could in his style, although my writing isn't as archaic as his. And I also went for the whole thing of where he had a habit of sometimes just basically, foreshadowing to the point where it was obvious what was going to happen in the story, but yet as you're reading it, you've got this sense of dread and this sense of hope, thinking, well, maybe that's not what's going to happen. And so I went with that sort of same approach to the story. And the other one, like I say, is also Lovecraftian, but I went a completely different direction with it, with a whole intro that's very much not Lovecraftian, and it's set well in the future. So, and then, like I say, that's the basic premise there, but I'll turn it over to the other guys to talk about themselves and their stories.
Heath,
Yes, sir.
little bio intro.
Oh, sure. I'm Heath Alberts, live in Northern Illinois. Have a day job, but I also write. I own and run a boutique publishing company called Digital Ninjas Media. We publish about 91 titles, I think, currently. I don't know, it's a lot. And I haven't really written anything new in a while. Just haven't had time. So yeah, I'm not that interesting.
You want to talk about the Batteryman a little?
Oh, we're talking about our stories now? Sure.
Yeah, just a
So
little bit.
I actually
Probably delve into more detail with them later when
Yeah,
Calvin has questions, but yeah, just give a basic idea, I think.
Sure. So basically, I like to, I write for pleasure. And so I've given myself the task very often of writing in different genres and different voices. And sometimes I don't have enough for an entire book, but I will have enough for a novella. I've done a few of them now. And the Batteryman was one that was just kind of, it was like a Saturday morning thing that just kind of poured out of me. And it was really, when I looked at it when it was done, I was actually very happy with it. So basically the premise is in a nutshell, history repeats itself, and one hopes that it won't, but I think we all kind of see where humanity is headed at this point, and we're all wondering what the reset's going to look like, and maybe we'll get it right in the next iteration. And so it's kind of a throwback to that sort of mentality where, you know, let's see if we can get it right this time. And so I wanted to write it from the point of view of basically something that was miraculous that would never be understood to be miraculous. And that was an android that had become sentient and was just experiencing its sentience and understanding that it was sentient for the first time. And it was experiencing that in a world that had basically just ended. And so I wanted to sort of give the impression of how important those little small miracles can be, especially to the person that's experiencing it, and how unfortunate it is that we provided them a society and a place to experience it in that is often less than ideal, if that makes sense. So that was part of it too, because I've always had a fascination with Alan Turing. And if anybody knows who that is, Alan Turing was a mathematician, and he proposed something called the Turing Test, and that was, in a nutshell, if somebody could speak to a computer and not tell whether it was a computer or a human being, and it could emote and do things that a human being could do, then it would be concluded to be sentient. And I'm really nutshelling that there. In essence, that's really what it is. So yeah, that story is one that I've often reread, and I really do enjoy it. And of my novellas, that's the one that usually gets the most feedback, the most positive feedback anyway. People tend to enjoy that one. So,
well, we'll jump into that shortly. Dustin.
Hello, thank you for having me here. My name's Dustin Ernest. I also reside in Northern Illinois, and I have been writing since 2015. Um, I've actually published previously with Gary. As a matter of fact, that's how we met. On Facebook through writing and stuff, and that's how we've gotten connected. And I consider Gary a friend, and he's
Consider you
always
well.
and his he's always got good stuff, and it I mostly write with themes of horror, horror, sci-fi. Bleakness is kind of a theme that I go along with a lot. Not out of not out of necessarily how I feel towards the world, but the fact that I feel that it's a hopelessness and bleakness, I feel like, are things that are not explored deep enough in popular media, because obviously, media is mostly money driven. It's people like feel good stuff. It's very, happy endings, and everything gets resolved somehow. And I've always kind of run against that grain where I'm like, nah, hold up. One of my themes when I started writing was no happy endings. I go for more thoughtful endings. I've published a short story called The Killer Grins before. It is about a kid who buys a classic computer set and software set from a lonely woman from across the street, and one of the games in it is a text adventure that becomes sentient and starts affecting this kid's life as he plays through it. And it's pretty. I'm good at capturing horrific, so it's pretty horrific. And before that, I actually self-published a collection of horror stories called "Disturbing Tales of Anguish and Horror." It's kind of a long title. It's the first thing I ever wrote. It was a collection of 10 short stories. Um, a lot of them are very bleak. I followed my rule: no happy endings. And anyone who's read them has certainly discovered that yes, there's no happy endings. Sometimes it's horrific. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's very calm and um, almost defeated in a way, where, and not so much defeated, but rather surrendered. It's the main character has usually surrendered to their fates. So I like exploring that side of storytelling a lot more, because I didn't see a lot of examples of it. It could also be the fact I maybe haven't exposed myself to as much media as you guys have. That's a theme I like to explore, and I feel like I've carved my element out of it. So, I like it. I'm gonna try to branch out as I go on, but I really, for now, that's kind of my comfort zone. My comfort zone is other people's discomfort in my stories in a way. So kind of the contrarian in me.
Interesting.
Mhm.
I like that. No, I wrote it down. No happy endings. So
Mhm.
that kind of tells me that you're not a big fan of the Sound of Music.
Actually, I appreciate it.
Okay.
It's I like I
Okay.
could I appreciate. It's not that I have any I don't have any resentments or any reservations against happy stories, because they certainly have their place. And we're a species of optimism. I mean, we we live and exist every day in a universe that abhors our existence. We are the antithesis of universal law. Our very existence is an affront to the universe on a daily basis. So every day we persevere just by breathing and waking up in the morning. But yeah, no, I'm for my writings and the topics that I like to cover. I like to remind people it's not always sunshine and rainbows, and the hills aren't always going to be alive.
Okay. Hey, I think it's great.
Mhm.
Listening to you, a question when I was reading everything, a question popped into my head. Uh, you say no happy endings. it is, and this is for all of you, is our world, in our modern world, has that, with climate and violence, and pandemics and racism, I mean, everything bad, and in China and the United States, and the threat of nuclear war, which is diminished now, it's rising. All of these things, climate change, all of these things thrown together, has that driven you all to horror? And if not that, then what did drive you to horror?
Well, let me answer first on that if I can. I was actually growing up. I got into horror very, very early. I mean, I remember Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine. I used to get that all the time, and I remember watching Dark Shadows as a kid. I would come home from school, rush home from school to see it because I loved the vampire. And so, horror was a big thing for me. And then when Kolchak the Night Stalker came out, I was just very into horror back then. And even Rod Serling's Twilight Zone often could head in that direction, which I was a fan of that and Outer Limits. And so I think that, to me, the horror thing came from that. It's been part of who I am. The funny thing too, I wanted to mention with No More New Year's, the whole concept of No More New Year's, and it's all apocalyptic, and there is, what if there were no more New Year's? Either the human race is gone, the planet's gone, whatever. It seems really bleak, and it's not that I'm a bleak or type person. The funny thing about it is, for one thing, I think it's almost cathartic to read stuff like this, because you realize that as messed up as our world is, it's not as bad as the world in that story. But the other thing is, I mean, to me, and going to some of what you were talking about, the way the world is now, the other big part of my personality growing up was I was a huge Star Trek fan, the original series, and I was a huge fan of superhero comic books. And so to me, I'm actually an optimist. I think that I can't get it out of my head that no matter what the worst thing that winds up happening to us, we're going to find a way out of it. Even if it looks bleak, there's going to be a way out of it somehow. It may not be pretty for everybody. It ain't going to be easy, but we will find a way out of it because I'm an optimist that way.
Okay.
So I kind of wandered off your question, but yeah,
No, that's fine.
I've been into horror my whole life pretty much.
Okay. Heath?
I don't write much that I would really consider to be horror, believe it or not. I tend to write, again, just for my own purposes, and my works really run the gamut. I mean, really run the gamut. I think the most surprising thing that I found in writing, I wouldn't say horror, but perhaps bleaker works, is that I never expected them to progress so far to fruition as they have in the last decade. I'm actually appalled that some of the things that I have written might actually come to pass before I die. And that is something I never would have guessed. And so it does kind of put a bleak spin on things. My strength in writing tends to be, I want to write something that makes you think, but also gets your emotions going. I really want those two things working in harmony when you're reading my stories. And if I've done that, I feel like I've done my job. So with horror, I'm not really a huge fan of horror works. I wouldn't consider myself a horror writer. I mean, I think it speaks more to what Dustin said. It's more about thought-provoking bleakness, although probably not nearly to the level that he's talking about, and not nearly to the commitment to that theme that he's talking about, for me anyway.
Okay. Gary, you said something I thought was fascinating. The way you look at things, that we're going to find our way out of it. And somehow I suspect, being concentrating a lot these last 3 or 4 or 5 months on the environment and climate change, I somehow, beneath the surface, I worry that too many people think we're just so good that we'll find our way out of it. And it's almost like precipice, living on the precipice, or playing a game of chicken, like that movie Rebel Without a Cause, when they're driving to the edge of the cliff, James Dean, and who jumps out of the car first, and James Dean jumped out and the other kid went over the cliff. that's precipice, or playing chicken with a bus. I always wanted to do that, but I was chicken.
Well, and I think, getting back to what we talked about earlier, I think you're going to see not necessarily humanity as it is come out the other side of this. You're going to see the next iteration come out the other side of this after all of the horrible, bad things have happened to a lot of really good people. I think that's really, in my mind, that's what you're going to see come out the other side of this. There is going to be something absolutely abysmally, horribly terrible, and then there will be a reset. And at that point of reset, we're going to be able to try again with the survivors, with whomever is still around to try again. That's the way I see it anyway. Somebody's going to live. I just don't know who or where or when.
Right.
Somebody's going to live. And those individuals are going to say, okay, we can either do the same thing again, or we can look at doing something different this time.
Interesting. So, gosh, there's so many things floating around my head. So I guess the best way to begin is at the beginning, and I'm just going the order of what I read in No More New Year's. I had the PDF. That's what I'm looking. So let's talk about debut tour. Some questions right away, right off the bat, with Gavin Henderson, who has a hot rock magazine. I thought of you, Gary.
Oh, no. Although, I remember I do write about music journalists once in a while and stuff, because I remember something, it's always been said, which is write what you know. So, I've been backstage at enough concerts and, talked to enough musicians, and I've done the music journalist thing enough to have an idea of how it works. So I think that is sort of what I know. So I do go to that sometimes, but no, it's not intended to be me.
So you constructed, and it really emoted me. You constructed quite a story. Am I allowed? Should I be giving stuff away here on air?
You can give some stuff away.
Okay, but
that story is the one that sort of tells what it's going to happen right at the beginning anyway, in a way, because it's one of those that's meant to build the dread, because it's coming and you're hoping it's not, but it is coming.
So what I'm trying to spit out here is what amazed me. We talked about it before we went on air. Is your storyline, and folks coming back to Earth, and I had done some interviewing and with people on my channel. Anyway, what I'm trying to say, I'm trying to respect your story and not give it away. But what haunted me, that's a great word to use in this group. What haunted me is that there is a group here on Earth, and they're all over the world, that believe in what you wrote. That and I'm being evasive. I don't want to give stuff.
Well, you know what? Like I said, those stories, both of those stories are based on Lovecraft's mythos. And what's really funny about that, when you bring about people believing it, I have to figure out how to say this sort of tactfully. Let me just say that I think these guys are way off base, but I literally know of at least one person who actually believes that Lovecraft's pantheon of gods is real. And he actually worships Cthulhu, which is, he has a whole cult of Cthulhu. And I met the guy when I was working on Strange Sound of Cthulhu. Didn't actually meet him in person, but I chatted with him quite a bit online. Seemed like a really nice guy. I liked him, but definitely not my thing. Let's put it that way. But so there is actually at least a few people. There are a few people who believe that Cthulhu's mythos is real and that they're going to come back. So, yeah.
Okay. And in keeping with the spirit here, there are some folks who believe that UFOs are people who planted us here. and they're watching us ever so more closely these days because we're kind of messing things up, and they're poised to come back and kind of straighten us out. Maybe like that movie, The Day the Earth Stood Still with Michael Rennie. You know,
That didn't work out so well for the humans.
no, and I don't subscribe to stuff. I just listen and you know, do one of these ahas with respect to UFOs, and you know, and then of course there's been a spate of information being released by the government with respect to UFOs and stuff. I won't mention names or I respect privacy and stuff, but you know, I had the occasion to interview somebody really high up in the world, and we talked a little bit about UFOs. I had to ask that question, I got, because you know it's government, I got such an evasive answer, but anyway, we did hear in America back in the 60s, and we made UFOs on flying saucers to see if they were viable as a flying entity, and they weren't aerodynamically sound. So when we experimented with them, and then we threw away the project because it didn't work. But people did see it, you know, these things flying around. But I couldn't really get answers. But it's all that whole topic which you wrote about is really viable, and that's what kind of haunted me. And of course, I loved the ending. It was a magnificent ending.
Again, very typical Lovecraftian ending, which was what I was going for on that one.
Yep, really. And I wanted to say, you know, again, I have all these pages of notes that because I didn't have a lot of time. But anyway, I love your description, you know, with the eyes and it's powerful stuff. Great imagination.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and you know, you know, and how you constructed, you know, being on tour as a normal rock and roll reporter, and being on tour with this band, and how you constructed all of that, and how you moved it on is great stuff.
Well, thank you.
So, moving on, next was Batteryman, which you alluded to a little bit, Heath, and I'll say this on air. Reading that, and I'm a stream of consciousness guy, and whatever hits me and moves me. So in reading the Batteryman, by the way, the terminology you used, might I ask, is those real terminology things? All the terminology in the Batteryman stuff I'd never seen. In you're describing whatever you're describing. I don't know if that was real terminology, whether it was time periods and there's just a lot of words there that I just never saw before.
No, so I actually, a lot of times I draw, if I'm creating a word, I want to use a word that you know what I mean, but you don't identify the word as being something that you've heard before in that frame of reference. So a lot of times I will refer back to, if you look at like Babylonian, Sumerian, that sort of mythologies, I will take words from ancient languages that actually have either a similar or tangential meaning.
Okay.
And I will reuse them in a situation so as to imply that that word was in use prior to even that civilization, and then move forward, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. In other words, the words exist. They're not contrived. You didn't make them up. The words exist somewhere.
Right, right. They're just in very, very ancient languages, and I like to kind of poke around in those ancient languages.
Okay, okay. So, again, I don't want to give a lot of stuff away. And I found a creative way to talk about Batteryman and not give a lot of stuff away, is to tell you what movies popped into my head as I'm reading through this. The Wizard of Oz, the Tin Man, and the Self-Lube. These, I mean, by the way, I don't have to be right. This is just what emoted me. And moving along, we discussed it before, Forbidden Planet. That also, and with the creatures who used to, the Krell, actually, I'm remembering that word. But anyway, reading your story, it filled me up. So I've got the Wizard of Oz, and I've got Forbidden Planet, and I have the movie Logan's Run, and then I also have the movie It Came from Another World, The Thing, with James Orness. All this just filled me up, and your imagination also is like, wow. So, am I on target with some of these things?
I don't know, because a lot of those movies I haven't seen since I was a kid, so I don't necessarily really remember them. The Wizard of Oz, I obviously remember. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I can correlate the story to any movie that I'm aware of, but I'm certain if those movies fit the bill, that I wouldn't dispute that. Okay. I just don't know enough to know.
Okay. I mean, that's and of course Antarctica, the ice, in the Thing, the ice, there's a scene in the beginning of the movie with the ice, but that was my takeaway. Also, in reading the Batteryman, I thought of Ray Kurzweil, and people don't know he's got about 160 PhDs.
He's a very smart man.
He's a very smart man. Literally, I'm not BSing here. He's got about 160 PhDs, and he's into just about everything from the Kurzweil keyboard he invented. And he's beyond brilliant. So he started, and I'm going to throw this up, it's a little off topic, but he started something some years ago called Singularity, and this is what popped into my head in reading the Batteryman. Singularity is his impression that at some point in 2043, or I forget the exact date, man, like the Batteryman, man and machine will come together, and out of that merger of man and machine, and gosh, we're really headed down that road.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because we, at the heart of it, I think we as a society and as a civilization understand that it's a really good idea, but we also know that we're fallible and we're human, which makes it a really, really bad idea. And yet we keep going like Thelma and Louise toward the cliff, and just thinking, well, maybe we'll stop, and we know damn good and well we won't stop. So when it happens, it's going to be interesting. When there are a lot of stories that are written where when software becomes sentient or hardware becomes sentient, the first thing they do is they say, well, I'm supposed to fix things. So what's wrong with this planet? And the first thing they look at is humanity. Humanity is the problem. Humanity is a virus. Humanity is a disease. And in a lot of ways, that's really not a wrong-headed notion. Yeah, Kurzweil, I know I've got some of his books somewhere around here. Yeah, I can't remember what it is. The Man Machine. I can't remember what it's called. But yeah, I know what you're talking about. and the concept of wetware and the concept of nanotechnology that runs on piezoelectrics and things like that, I don't think are all that far-fetched anymore. And I'm curious and horrified to see how it happens and where it happens and when it happens and how it's used. But I don't hold out a lot of hope because humanity is kind of stupid sometimes. And all it takes is one or two idiots to just kind of ruin everything.
Correct. No kidding. We are.
Yeah.
Yeah. We lost Gary. I guess he'll reemerge. Kurzweil, when I began my journalism career, he always fascinated me. Fascinated on a lot of different levels. I'm nowhere even close to even comprehending him, and even comprehending you guys and your imagination and what you write. I kind of write what I know best me. That's what I write about me. In some, but anyway, so when I began he had he has a singularity university where they discuss all the different aspects of what would happen with man merging with machine, and they deal with even practical aspects. Well, who's going to be the recipient of all that progress and all that knowledge? You know, Jeff Bezos and Warren Buffett, they'll be able to buy whatever they need. But here's the point relating to the Batteryman, what also made me think, and I wrote it in my notes. There was a Russian, so they had a 4-day singularity conference in the city, and I prior to that they had it up at Harvard, and it was like $1,000 for the weekend. It was a little out of my budget, and then 3 years later they came back to New York, and I then had become a journalist. So I said, oh wow, I think I can get a press pass, and I did.
Nice.
I got a press pass, and I went to
Good
this
deal.
thing. It was a great deal. Boy, do I love press passes. My goodness, it is just a great thing. So I went for the whole 4 days. But here's the point: they had a Russian scientist speaking, and they also had Ken Jennings, who had won all that money on Jeopardy.
Oh, sure, on Jeopardy.
Jeopardy champion. Yep.
Yep, and actually he talked. He was there, and he was about to take on Watson, IBM's computer. And it was man versus computer, in keeping with the spirit of the conference. He was going to take on Watson and see who won, like a Jeopardy thing.
Yeah, they feature Watson a lot on Jeopardy, and especially in recent years. And I think I remember reading about that. Watson was going to be an actual contestant on Jeopardy.
Yeah, and so. This of all the thing, all my takeaways from these 4 days, 3 days, 4 days, I don't remember, was they had a Russian scientist. And here's the thing in my head about Batteryman. They had a Russian scientist who was working on, and you use the word sentient, but he was working on taking this up here and like hooking up a USB thing, transferring everything up here. To a Batteryman, to a cyborg, call it whatever you want, and this is my essence, is this up here over my shoulder. The rest of the stuff is all basically replaceable, and
it's ancillary. It's ancillary in order for this to happen.
Yeah, and the Russian scientists said 30 or 40 years they will be able to do this, to take this. And just like hooking up a USB and transferring it to a cyborg, and then complete total, immortality. And
yeah, and one of the story arcs, there's about 8 story arcs in my second novel, The Last Rites, and one of the story arcs is a military complex that is utilizing impoverished human beings to try and make that happen, and they finally do to their own detriment, and that becomes a facet of the story. But it's one of those things where I think it's possible, but I can't envision or wrap my head around how they're going to make it happen, because the mind is so pliable and there's so many different things that we still don't understand about it and how it functions. I mean, we have some really, really good general ideas, but when you look at a giant moist piece of flesh up here that makes all that happen, it's mind blowing.
Yeah, it is.
Not to, no pun intended, but
It is.
but I do believe that there will come a point where one's entire memory and entire brain carriage will be able to be imparted into some sort of a silicon device or a similar device for a for a more permanent or a permanent solution to life itself. It's exciting and it's horrifying at the same time.
Right. I mean, a lot of this topic reminds me. I don't know if either of you have happened to watch. It's kind of a more recent sci-fi called Altered Carbon.
I love James. I've been reading Morgan since the beginning. I love Morgan.
Yes, and I believe I didn't read all of it. I've seen I've seen the television adaptation and everything. The general sense is that they find almost an extraterrestrial form of carbon that is allowed to carry the entire synaptic network of a person, and they're able to actually compress it down into this disk that they call altered carbon and swap it between bodies.
Wow.
Or even neocast it across space.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
And it's and that's one of the things that's one of the big hurdles. That's what found it so interesting to me, because I feel like one of the biggest hurdles we would have with with capturing a person, capturing a brain, an actual the like a soul of a person, for lack of a better term. It would be so hard to capture that into hard data, because we are creatures of patterns. We're creatures of impressions. We are
And emotions.
Yes, and emotions. We are, where data is absolute. It's ones and zeros, yes or no, true or false, equals or does not equal.
And that's where variable pliability comes in and gets messy.
Yes, exactly. So I would love to think that one day we could achieve that kind of human preservation, that kind of personality preservation, and possibly even brain restoration. But I'm personally, I have no idea how they're going to replicate the way we recall things, because when we recall something from memory, we almost very few of us among humanity are capable of recalling it exact. I read this study a long time ago. I can't remember who said it, but we live off of impressions. So when we see something, we only store maybe 10% of the pattern.
It's an abstraction of it.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. The abstraction. Thank you. I was struggling to come up with that one. But yeah, so to cover the abstraction of who we are, I mean, my God, I don't know if there's anything we have that could do that.
And I don't think at first, especially at first, maybe later, but the way I see it is you're going to have to develop some sort of a software framework for the data to live in that has either a limited amount of pliability on those fringes, or that is just so data intensive that it creates enough of an environment for the data that came out of the person's actual mind to be comfortable living in, even though it isn't quite, it's not the human experience, but it can replicate the human experience enough to be passable.
It can emulate it.
There you go. Emulate it.
Yep.
Thank you. Emulate it. Yeah.
Yep. And I feel like with quantum computing starting to come into its own,
which is horrifying.
It's both fascinating and horrifying. It's in the next, I would say, in the next 10 years, two of humanity's like tipping point achievements are going to be space travel and the normalization of quantum computing, are perfecting of it, because they have it now. You know that it's
They
already.
they do. I mean, but the problem with that is if you once you have quantum computing, passwords and firewalls mean nothing.
They're
Absolutely
useless.
nothing. They are completely,
Useless.
and we are not prepared for that.
No,
we are
we're not.
prepared to. We're not prepared to pit quantum computing power against common software. And so every Bitcoin wallet is rateable. Every data server is hackable, and that's it's going to turn the whole world on its head. It really is.
Oh, yes.
I mean, that's one of the things that keeps me up at night is quantum computing. Quite honestly.
Oh yeah, I'm a career sysadmin. Trust me, I'm paying very close attention to this because it's either going to make my profession just utterly useless, or it's going to thrust it into a level that I'm probably going to finally look at it and say, nah, I'm done.
I don't know.
Of course, you're talking about something I know nothing about, quantum computing, nor do I want to know anything about, because I'm too old.
Perfectly understandable.
Yeah. But here's my question. I love going off topic like this. I don't know anything about it, and I don't ever want to learn anything about it. And I have a different password for everything I have. I have 1,000 passwords. They're all different because I'm paranoid. But so my question is, there's got to be some kind of new computer around that helped Pfizer and Moderna and J&J come up with the first, dealing with the COVID virus, the vaccine. They have this whole different. So now you have this Omicron, and Pfizer saying, "Hey, give us 100 days, we'll." So I'm saying to you guys, you're talking about quantum computing. Is there some kind of supercomputer that's helping these guys out?
I believe so. One thing I've actually been, I don't know if you've ever watched Kurzweil, but it's a series of videos by a man named Philip Detmer, and he takes these high concept topics and turns them down, and he's able to filter them down enough to they're short, kind of animated info, like infotainment in a way, but he presents these high concepts in such an easily absorbable message that it doesn't lose a lot of the scientific impact of it. And as a matter of fact, he just released a book called Immune. His name's Philip Detmer, and he goes very deep but approachable into how our immune system operates against these foreign invaders, and it all comes down to spike proteins, what they call that. Basically just hundreds of millions of puzzle pieces. And a lot of what these scientists are doing is they're just combing through the puzzle pieces to see what fits. And based on, certain genetic markers along the way of the DNA chain, they're able to make determinations and follow certain patterns. We're human beings, we're very pattern oriented. So that's a lot of what they're doing. So when they say that they can take something they already have a vaccine for and have something ready for another mutation in 100 days, that's maybe embellishing it a little bit, but not completely far-fetched, because it's like putting together a puzzle that's already got the four corners put together. So you put the corners together first. So now to get these new variants, it's like putting together the middle. That's the best way I can describe it. And with my limited understanding, I am not an immunologist. I am not I'm not a deep biological science person. It's a great personal interest of mine, but when they say that 100 days for a new variant, I'm optimistic. I don't 100% believe it, but I don't believe it's out of I don't believe it's out of the realm of reality either, because when we get the flu vaccines every year, it's new mutations
Right.
every year when we do it every year. So, and I feel like this is going to be the future of COVID is, hey, get your COVID/flu shot. They'll mix it up into, I'd say 2-3 years. They'll mix it up into 1 yearly vaccine, get it done. And that's that. That's just my impression of it.
Fascinating. By the way, I love the way we kind of went off on this, and that's the whole purpose of why we got together. You know,
Mhm.
starting, Gary's trying to get on here, and we're talking about quantum computing, and can you hear us, Gary? No. Anyway.
I can hear you.
All right.
You
Well,
can't hear me.
we can't see you, but at least we can hear you. That's part.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, we can hear you. So there you are.
There you are.
There you are. We, in your absence, we went off on a severe tangent.
A very fascinating one.
Yeah.
Yes.
We just finished talking about protein spikes on viruses, and talking and computer quantum computing. So you didn't miss anything, because I didn't understand anything.
Yeah, I was gonna say, see, look what happened, Gary. You went away, and then we all three just went off in 3 different directions.
Yeah,
So
we did.
went off
We
three.
needed your guidance, and we kind of went off on tangents, but it was interesting. The quantum computing. I started all this off with what I saw in New York some years ago, with a Russian scientist saying he can transfer everything up here into a cyborg, and he's working on that.
You know, when you said that, it got me to thinking. I don't know if you've ever read any Nancy Kress. Nancy Kress is kind of known as the queen of short stories, and her best known work is Beggars in Spain, which is a trilogy. And she, in the end, actually said, I believe that, I'm really meant for short stories. I wrote these novels under duress. They aren't really what I wanted them to be. And unfortunately, the last 2 novels really are lacking compared to the star-studded first one. But one of the things she posited that really struck me is that when humanity becomes hyper intelligent and we don't sleep anymore, we find a way to avoid sleep, and we know everything, we get really, really bored. And what do you do with a bored humanity? And she tackles that, and I've never really seen anybody else tackle it from that perspective. And I was always like, damn, there's like 8 smart people, and that's really all we need, and everybody else is just kind of like, meat bags floating around.
Everyone's
It was fascinating the way she tackled that.
yeah, they're just kind of rolling with it, and that's actually really fascinating to me too, because in a lot of ways, with all this unrest and constant arguing, and I mean, anyone who's been on Twitter for more than 5 seconds, my God, you can see what that's turned into. I guess, to put it in a single line, when you get a bored humanity, you get Twitter. You get a bored humanity, you get Twitter.
Oh,
That's
man.
what happens. Because, and that's what a lot of it is. You get 8, 9, 10 really smart, really famous, popular people on there, and everyone's just kind of reacting to them.
Oh.
And then they're reacting to the people that don't agree with them. And that's my definition of a bored humanity.
Interesting.
It's Twitter.
Interesting. In a positive way, I just read about Jack Dorsey stepping down.
Jack Dorsey stepped down, and as per usual, the people are very concerned about the new guy, and we'll see how that goes. But in kind of a humorous way, I'm reminded of Douglas Adams, when he said, in the beginning, God created the universe, and people have agreed since then that that was maybe not a good idea. Yeah, I'm paraphrasing that, but if you read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Douglas Adams was known for his, simplistic but legendary little one-liners like that.
Interesting. When I was reading about Jack Dorsey stepping down, Twitter only has 200 million. Only 200 million people who use it. So that might be turning this around. That might actually be a kind of a positive thing. Facebook's got a couple of billion with a B.
How many of those are bots?
Maybe there are. I'm sure actually there's probably a chunk of them are. But I'm saying that not everybody's on Twitter.
Right.
So maybe that's kind of refreshing. That maybe.
Yeah, I mean, then because you it kind of applies to a lot of social media in general too. It's also the fact that one thing that works against us, at least in the short term, is the worldwide instant connectivity has allowed us to react before we think.
Well, and everybody's an expert because of it.
And yes, exactly, and it's incentivized it. There are people out there who've made careers out of reacting.
Social influencers.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes. They're because in the days of, when television, there was a great fear that television would be this, breakdown of civilization, but there was still enough of a gap in communication between humanity that by the time the news reached them and by the time they could react in a sort of public forum, they had time to think. They had time for that initial emotion rush to come and go. They had time to rationalize. Now there's no time to rationalize. A lot of people who, their followers depend on it. The almighty algorithm depends on it. It's, and people love hot takes because it's fun. It's entertaining. It through their emotion and through the hot take, givers' emotions, they too get to feel the emotion. So it makes them feel like they're part of something. So you've got this, it's almost like this weird drug cocktail of reactivity and inclusiveness, but packaged up in a product that's being sold to you.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I kind of picture like the next nuclear war being sparked off by like a random post about like some celebrity's shoes just going horribly awry and devolving into nuclear war. I mean, I can just I'm joking, but I'm kind of serious too.
Well, you're not too far off. It's that harkens back to when Trump was president and he called Kim Jong-un a fat, scared little man.
You said something really funny, and what an appropriate Heath. One of my favorite movies, which is, it's not dystopian, but it's called Sleeper with Woody Allen. I don't know if you guys ever saw that.
I know of it, but I don't know.
It's an early Woody Allen movie. The premise is, watch how I turn this around to what you just said, Heath. Nuclear war. So Woody Allen is the proprietor of a health food store in contemporary times, because that's Woody Allen's thing, and he's put to sleep as an experiment, and he's sort of cryogenically frozen like they did to Walt Disney. I don't know, but Woody Allen is cryogenically frozen, and he's wrapped with aluminum foil, and he's put away somewhere, and then 500 years into the future, he's unfrozen and he's unwrapped. And this is probably one of the funniest scenes, and I watch a ton of movies, that I've ever seen, period. So he's unwrapped, and there are 5 or 6 doctors unwrapping him. It's 500 years into the future. And they unwrap him, and he opens up his eyes, and they tell him it's now 500 years into the future. And I'm getting this fairly right. And each one of the doctors, the 5 or 6 doctors and people who are unwrapping him, they're all smoking cigarettes. And remember, Woody Allen was a proprietor of a health food store 500 years back. And he says to them, guys, what, this is the future. Why are you smoking? And the 5 or 6 said, well, we finally found out that it's actually good for you. Which is hysterical. And then
Oh,
they give him a quick history of the world over the last 500 years. And they tell Woody that there was a nuclear war. And so Woody said, well, how did it get started? And they said, well, Albert Shanker, who at the time when the movie was made in the 60s, he was the president of the UFT, the United Federations of Teachers in New York City, and he was militant. And he wanted to get everything he wanted for his teachers, and he would go out on strike all the time. And they said Albert Shanker started the Third World War. He got a hold of a nuclear bomb.
Nice. Nice.
that's funny.
That is funny.
And, you know, very prophetic, because my wife taught in New York, pointing to her in the kitchen there. She taught in New York. She was a teacher for like 19 years in New York City. And I have to tell you that he was a great man, and he fought for his teachers, and we live our lives today in the level that we live because of him and what he did for teachers and the benefits and the whole package. So anyway, you know, we're jumping off on tangents.
When he said that, I was kind of reminded of the movie. Have you seen Idiocracy?
I was thinking that one.
No,
That's right where I went. Right where I went. It's just from a different bent, but yeah, that's kind of what it reminded me of.
okay. I love the tangents that we're jumping off on. By the way, we should, if Gary can hear us, you know, we should resume the next time Gary wants to put us together, because these are great tangents that we're jumping off
Can
into.
you? Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
we can hear you. We can't see
Good.
you.
Yeah, I've gone through, this is my third device. I'm on my PC in my office, and the camera, I can actually turn the camera on, but I haven't used this camera in so long, and when I turned it on, it's got some kind of really weird effect. I mean, I'll turn it on, it'll look pretty freaky, but then again, I always look freaky, but I'll be glad to turn it on. See, it's really bizarre looking.
Hey, it's not bad.
It's not bad. By the
It's
way,
an improvement.
it lends itself to the spirit of the evening.
Yeah, there you
Yes.
Yeah. So just stay as you are. Don't
go.
putz around with that. Just stay like that. So we've been going off on tangents, Gary, and I'm not going to go back over them. But what I did say is that we should reassemble here at the next your next inspiration, because we start talking about stuff and we go into a million different topics, and I think that's great. This is great repartee. So finally, sort of finally, I don't remember already how much we discussed the Destroyer of Worlds. Did we? Well, I think we might have done this before we went on air.
Oh yes, yeah, a lot of we went through a bit of it for on air, but that's okay. We can by
Yeah,
all means ask
well,
away.
I did say, because I'm a stream of consciousness guy, and you took me in the Destroyer of Worlds to a bunch of different movies.
Hmm.
The Incredible Shrinking Man, and again, I'm not giving your story away, which means people should, you know, pick this up, and also The Day of the Triffids, which is kind of a scary movie for me too. But unfortunately, it was a happy ending. That's in The Day of the Triffids.
Okay, no, and that's okay. Like I said,
Okay.
with you know, I feel like a lot of what I write, a lot of horror and everything, it's a lot of it I do write for fun, because I like Gary, I got turned on to horror at a very early age. I was a lot, I'm obviously the youngest of the group here, so back in the 80s I was in the single digits in age, and my my parents were pretty liberal with what they let me watch. And I think by the time I was 7 or 8, I had made my way through all of the Friday the 13th and the Nightmare on Elm Streets. I think I'd even watched Warlock at one point too. And that's, American Werewolf in London. And
Great movie.
oh yeah. So, I got bit by the horror bug early on, and for me, it was a lot of fun. I find that level of fear fun because as a kid, I I had the frame of mind enough to know that it wasn't real. So, but it was fun. It was fun to think about, and it got my mind going. And I would stay up at night and just think about concepts that anything that came into my head is very spacey in a sense where it's probably a good thing I didn't find Lovecraft as a kid because I probably would have just obsessively read it to the point where I'd have lost my mind. But that's where I get a lot of inspiration from. I want when people are reading what I write, I want them to know that I want them to be scared but fun. As a matter of fact, that's why Destroyer of Worlds is actually a bit of a departure for me because that's actually a little bleaker than even what I write.
No kidding.
And yeah, that's bleaker than what a lot of what I write.
Yeah, it's
And
bleak.
so when people read a lot of my horror stories, they can say, "Ooh, that's fun. I never want it to happen to me, but I'll be okay." But reading Destroyer of Worlds, I want them to see that this isn't as far fetched as you might be thinking. Because one inspiration for it too was Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking had one of his last musings that he had in his lifetime about alien species is they would see us as they would look at us much in the same way Columbus saw the natives of the lands that he discovered. We're somebody to be conquered because to any advanced species, we would be seen as pretty mundane and probably less worthy of existence than they are. It's a lot of the same way we collectively treat animals. We have dominion over them. There are a lot of them are our food. When we want something and they're there, we move them off. And what would stop an advanced species from treating us the same way?
Wow.
We're just animal occupiers to be cleared away. And it's not too far-fetched to think that would be that. I would love to think that it would be like the Vulcans. They showed up and they're curious. They want to know us. They don't want to destroy us. They're enlightened. They have everything they need. But given the vastness of space, the sheer scale of distance between these worlds, if somebody comes to see us, it's going to be a really good reason for it. And it's probably not going to be in our best interest. So, without giving too much away, that's about what I wanted to get at. And I scared myself a little bit writing that because I was like, holy crap, that could happen.
It sure could. And you scared me. You really did scare me with that. And like I said, when I read all your stuff, you didn't. And at dinner tonight with my family, I was not a happy camper. Thanks, you guys.
No, well,
I was. That's what this did for me. And they said, "Why are you so quiet?" I said, "Well, I'm kind of thinking about stuff." It's because I was ingesting what you guys wrote, all of you.
I'm proud that it left an impression. I do feel a little bad that it maybe soured your night a little bit.
Hey, it's fine. I'm a big boy mouth.
Right. No, I understand. It's
Yeah.
I'm glad it was thought
But
provoking.
it's testament to all four of you, to all three of you. And I'm including Kevin too, because that was kind of haunting. But it was great stuff. I just really quickly, we started to do this before we went on air. Now that we covered your works, but I just wanted to bring up because you guys tonight it's kind of like Cher in the movie Moonstruck when she slaps Nicolas Cage's face. It was a great scene and tells him to snap out of it. Great scene, and you know, it was like you guys slapped my face tonight and told me to snap out of it. And then the movie that we started to talk about, On the Beach, the book and the movie, and like no other movie, and if we could just touch on this quickly, or not quickly, like no other movie I've ever seen, or book parenthetically, has left me in a really state of depression from that. And there's nothing violent, and there's no bombs bursting. And you love that, Heath. I know you said that.
Yeah, I discovered Nevil Shute about 4 years ago, and I've probably read 20 something of his works. And what's strange about him is he's an author who can write about like just any mundane thing, and it's just readable, it's interesting, and it's very rare that I find an author like that. But I started with Round the Bend. That was the first book of his that I read, which was basically about religion and how it forms and how it can be good and bad. And so On the Beach was the second book I read, and it's completely different. And it's one of those rare books, and there's probably just a handful that I've ever read that just made me, when I finished it, just made me sit back and think for a very, very long time. Because the way it was executed was, it was beautiful and it was horrible at the same time. And it was just so well done, so well done. Yeah, it was. But the premise is basically that nuclear war has already happened, and the people who are furthest flung from it are just waiting to die. And it's basically walking you through their lives and giving you a little bit of background as they wait to die. And that might sound really, really terrible. And I mean, in some ways it kind of is, but it's also, it's beautiful in the way that he brings out the best in humanity in those people that basically had no control over that situation. And I think maybe that's part of what's so compelling about it.
Interesting. And I watch it not all the time, but I watch it often enough. You know, I'm a big Gregory. I watch the movie, and it emotes me. And now I take On the Beach with all the stuff I'm doing with climate change, and kind of relating the two together, the subtleties of climate change, the biblical proportions, you know, seen out of Ghostbusters, the biblical proportions. You know, we've got a pandemic, and we've got fires, and we've got droughts, and we've got floods. It's all there, and so we're heading down that On the Beach type, in the mentality that came out of Glasgow, I think, in the UN conference a couple of weeks ago. The mentality is, and this is a quote from On the Beach, there's still time, brother. And it's maybe a terrible mentality, because it maybe it's not a call to arms.
At this point, though, it's more about how much can we prevent, knowing that some is already going to happen, and more very likely will if we don't put preventative measures in place now, because we're already past that precipice. We're past that point of no return for just fixing it. But it's interesting that you bring it up that way, because yeah, it really is. It's almost two different roads to the same destination in some ways. Although, I mean, with On the Beach, it's the complete obliteration of humanity. But yeah, we tend to be so reactionary when it comes to things, where we can forecast that it's coming, we can see that it's coming, we can see that it's bad, and yet for some reason we still, as a society and as humanity as a whole, we choose to be reactionary. And that's something I've just never really understood.
You know, and I agree completely, Heath. It's you know, we're very much you know, as Calvin said earlier, we live on the edge. We are precipice walkers, and you know, especially over the last 50, 60, 75 years, we've become very, it's almost like we have this collective sense of, let's let this ride, play chicken. Let's let this ride to the edge of the cliff and see how close we can jump out of the car and still live. That's what we're doing right now.
We're like a lazy kid. We'll do it tomorrow.
Yeah,
We'll-
yeah, oh, yeah. I'll do it tomorrow. Yeah, I got teenagers, so yeah, it's I'll do it tomorrow. Tomorrow might be too late. Sorry, kid. So yeah, I feel like, and I guess it's just my little prediction here, my 2 cents. I feel like we'll do something about it, but it'll be too late. They'll be like in Lost in Space, not the series, but the premise of the early 2000s film, I think it was actually from 2000, Lost in Space, was that they had to find a new planet because they said, that the technology, the sustaining technology came too late. The recyclers came too
Wow.
late.
Yeah.
Humanity is in limbo right now. They're surviving, but it all came too late. So I feel like they'll come up with the technologies just enough to keep us afloat until they can find somewhere else to go.
What's interesting to me too is that we as a society are so focused on habitation on the moon and habitation on Mars, and it's like, you can't even take care of the one planet you already have. Everything is already here, and you're talking about going somewhere else, and you can't even stop messing up this place where you live.
Yep,
That has always really blown my mind, just the stupidity of that.
correct.
If we're going to work on terraforming another planet, another body to turn it into Earth, why don't we do that to Earth?
Exactly. And you know what, guys, this is a nice way to kind of conclude our time together. By the way, Gary, I've said it, I don't know if you were bouncing back and forth, but this is a great little group, and I'm always here and to reconvene for another topic and another whatever, because this is such a tangential experience. I think it's been great, and totally thoroughly enjoyed. Wishing you guys and families a happy, healthy, wonderful New Year's.
Oh, absolutely.
You as well.
Yes,
Absolutely. You guys as well. I've had a blast.
Yeah.
Do not let 2022 hold your beer. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yes,
So,
exactly.
Anybody has any last thoughts? Or I've said it all. Happy, healthy New Year's. By the way, that's a
Absolutely.
great new way. By the way, when you wish somebody a happy New Year this year, don't wish them happy New Year's.
New Year's, plural.
I'd like
go.
that.
Yeah.
Gary,
Oh.
most of all, I want to thank you for being the energy and the driving force behind this get together and the work you do. And I thank you, Gary.
Well, thank you for having us on here. I mean, thank you for always.
Thank you,
continuing to
Gary
do
and
these.
Calvin,
These are
yes.
great.
Yeah.
These are great fun.
Yeah,
So-
absolutely. Thank you, you guys.
And
gonna-
sorry I had kept dropping out.
That's all right. As long
I had
as
two
you,
devices. One died. The other one wouldn't work really for it, so I had to find
but
another
listen,
heater.
you were the embodiment of the 60s. You tuned in and dropped out.
And there you go.
So that was great. Anyway, to be
I
continued.
should add, people can get the book at lulu.com/spotlight/strange sound.
And
It's
I'll have
also at
that.
GaryHillAuthor.com.
Yep, I'll have that on my promo piece. And actually, we'll hang around here. I'm going to officially sign off, thanking again you guys, and we'll hang around for a minute or two,
Okay.
just to touch base. Again, thank you all. Happy New Year's.